We started the YouTube channel Forbid TV about 2 months ago. Hello and welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. This is a recording, obviously, but we're live on the air right now as we speak on April 14th of 2015 in front of a radio audience called Liberty Tree Radio. I have a radio show called Forbidden Knowledge, and the website is forbiddenknowledge.info, and also something related to what I'm going to be talking about now will be the prepperstop.com. Those are the two websites that are relevant to what we're doing here right now. So I'm going to be talking about sorting through food storage choices. I'm going to have a different opinion what a lot of people aren't really covering. I've been in this type of knowledge business for 40 years or so for this particular topic, or all these topics relating to survival. We've never had to use these methods necessarily, certainly not at any kind of great degree, but for those of you who believe something could happen, we're going to be talking about sorting through the food storage choices. And I got 7 things listed in front of me. There's a lot of different ways. And yes, full disclosure here, I sell freeze-dried food. I sell MREs at these shows, but that's not where we're going to be. We're going to be talking about those briefly, but I don't turn my lectures into a big sales pitch. So the best way, and for those of you who don't really believe anything happened, well, you may be right. Maybe nothing will happen. But all throughout our lifetime, sometime during everybody's lifetime, at least once you will have a disruption of the grid for 5 days, 10 days, whatever, in a fairly extended period of time, what we're normally not used to, due to something that usually Mother Nature throws at us. And I think even FEMA and government sources even recommend you have, I think, about 5 days worth of food storage, maybe a week. I don't know what it is. I think maybe they're even lowering to 72. They really don't want you to be really independent, so they want to make it so that you have to be a little dependent on for what's to come. But it makes perfect sense, even if you don't believe anything will ever happen that we talk about in the prepper movement. It makes perfect sense to have a week or two worth of food stored at a minimum in case you get caught up in, and of course we all will get caught up in sometime in our lifetime, in a major power outage that puts us without food and water and may possibly even shelter for a week or two. So it makes perfect sense, even if you're not paranoid about any of this stuff, it makes perfect sense. So like an insurance policy. Why do you get insurance on your house? Because something could happen to your house. It might get burned down, it might get robbed. Now, maybe that'll never happen in your lifetime. You hope it never happens, but it might. But you generally don't think twice about not having insurance on your house. So why would you not have insurance on, let's call it what you call your life? Now, we're not talking about life insurance. We're talking about your survival, your ability to live if you didn't have this food storage. So that being said, there's a balance to all this, folks. So you don't have to get crazy with it. You don't have to start running out to buy pallets of freeze-dried food or MREs or whatever and hunker down with a 223 and hope everything goes okay. There's some balance here, because then you might be a little nuts if you do something that extreme. Maybe not, but who knows? You don't know. But a balance. The best way for food storage method is to grow your own. It's not really a storage method per se, but if you're constantly making your own food, growing it yourself, you're going to have, not only you're going to have healthier food, you're going to have inexpensive food, you're going to have some of the best nutrients in the food, depending on what your soil conditions are. It's the least expensive, really. It's the most nutritious. It's a wide range of shelf life, depending on the method of storage. Of course, there's always been, throughout man's history, methods of food storing, of growing your own food. And the most common that come to mind in our modern society are your own personal canning, the glass jars, that usually mason jars, that type of thing. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge to be learned there, so you really need to go online, or if you don't know, if you don't have any of the tools of the trade, you need to learn about not only growing your own food, but also how to store your own food that you grow yourself. It's absolutely mandatory to do, because you're going to, if you don't get the knowledge now, before something major happens, you're probably not going to be able to get the knowledge later. And also, you're going to need to have some tools on hand, some basic shovels, rakes, hoes, whatever, some basic gardening tools. And, of course, more importantly than all that is some kinds of seeds. Seeds, yes, don't forget the seeds, because if you don't have the seeds, if you aren't going to grow your own, if you can't, there's a lot of people who can't, live in a big major city, or if you're in an apartment building or something like that, maybe you can't grow your own food right there where you are. So have an ability to have some food that you could grow. Now, if you are in a city, you're going to be a lot of greater disadvantage anyway, because you may not even if you had a garden, you might not be able to protect it from the two-legged critters. Um, but you have, at least have to have the knowledge. If it's books, folks, have some books. Go, keep it simple, stupid. Go get some books. Have a book or two about some basic gardening if you don't have the knowledge already. Have a few basic tools. It costs you 20, 30 bucks at a yard sale, and it costs you a buck or two. So it's really something, it's very easy to do. It doesn't really cost much money. When somebody's trying to call me, I don't answer the phone while I'm on the air. So have some basic knowledge available, some basic tools, and some seeds. Seeds are going to be very important as well. Seeds, very important, seeds. So there's various ways, of course, besides canning. You could have root cellars. You could sprout your food. You could make jerky out of it. There's a lot of different ways of storing your own food, which will be the most healthy and least expensive. It can also be very emotionally satisfying to know you have your own food. It could be something you do as a regular lifestyle rather than a prep, so to speak, for an emergency. Because if you're doing this on a regular basis, then you already have your food available at any time, all the time, and it makes no difference what's happening in the outside world other than possibly protecting what you have. Okay, so hard copy books, if you don't have the knowledge. So growing your own is probably the best method. Okay, you can't do it growing your own, or you have limited ability to do something like that. What else can you do? And I'm going to do something on this phone here right now, and just make sure. Okay. So grow your own. The next thing on here that I have on the list in front of me is, and this is what a lot of you think. I don't have to put a stop to this line of thinking here, but hunting, gathering, fishing. Why do I put a stop to that? Well, we'll talk about that in a second here. First of all, it's inexpensive, just like growing your own. Now, it's a little harder to store when you're talking about hunting and gathering. It can be done, jerky and other methods, it can be done, so it's not impossible to do. There's a wide range of shelf life depending on the storage method. And again, you're going to need some skill, knowledge, and tools of how to gather, what to gather. Do you have a book on basic edible plants in your native area? Do you have a book on how to slaughter your own animals? How to prepare food and animal for the hunting, gathering, fishing category here? Now, it can be labor intensive. It can be very disappointing. You can sit there all day and not come across anything, or you've seen some of the so-called survival shows on TV. They sometimes have a really hard time gathering any food, as they spend all their time trying to get some basic things to eat. Sometimes they're on the verge of starvation. Now, imagine what would happen. So some of you may already be skilled in that. You may go, well, I have no problem. I'll go get me a deer. I know the native plants. I can go get me some Queen Anne's lace root or something. I can find something to eat, no problem. I'm a survivalist. I'm skilled in this knowledge. Well, here's the problem that a lot of you don't think about, and why I have to put a stop to your thinking about this being a practical method of your food prepping. Frankly, and why do you go, just stop and let's ask all you hunters out there, why do you go out on the very first day of hunting and sit there among all the other people and compete with whatever? Well, that's just it, you're competing. You go on the very first day of hunting because you're trying to get the things before they're all gone. You're trying to get the best of the biggest, and you're trying to get ahead of the game. Now, what would happen if something in majors happened, and then all of a sudden you got millions of hunters trying to get that same deer, or that same blade of grass even? Can you imagine the competition? Not just people with hunting license, but now we're talking about everybody, every single zombie out there. By zombies, those of you who don't understand, we're talking about the Walking Dead, basically, the people who didn't prepare, and they got to go start walking, finding something, anything that they can just to survive. So can you imagine when you have millions, you're competing now with 100-fold the hunters that you would normally have. How long do you think nature can sustain a system like that? I'm going to go back to history a little bit here for the Civil War. Now, nothing's really happened in this country. Well, everybody will tell you, oh, nothing's happened, nothing's ever going to happen. Well, let's go back to the Civil War. 150 years ago, Lincoln passed away, President Lincoln, today. And the Civil War, there were some bread riots in April of 1963, so 152 years ago. bread rioting in North Carolina and other places. Now, think about this. In the South, at the time, a monthly family's food bill was about $6.65 a month. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a zero to that. So to get you to try to so you can relate, because most of us can't relate to $6.65 a month for a food bill. So let's say $60.65. We're going to add 1 0 to all these numbers I'm about to give you. Okay, 1 0. We're adding a zero. So this is not historically accurate. It's modified for modern times. Okay, and even that is pretty low. $60.65 is actually very low. Okay, that was in 1861. $6.65. In 1863, a family monthly food bill. This is a monthly food bill, folks. A monthly food bill. So even the $60 is not practical. In 1863, it was now $680 a month. Okay. Again, I'm using numbers that you can relate to a little bit more. About 10 times the amount. And you could probably add 2 zeros to these numbers, actually, folks. So if you start out with $600.65 a month, now we're up to $6,800 a month, if you want to think of it in more realistic terms in today's money. Then, in 1864, a monthly family food bill would now be about $40,000 a month. Or in the case of 1 0, let's go back to the story goes, $400 a month back in 1864. Adding 1 0, that's $4,000. Could you even afford that, let alone $40,000, which it might be a more practical number for today's purpose? In other words, there was food shortages. Why was there food shortages? Well, think about this, and this goes back to your hunting, gathering, fishing paradigm. The armies, both the South and the North, devastating farms, devastating the countryside. Third Amendment is there to try to protect that from happening, but it didn't work out that way. So they raped the land. The army's going through rape the land, basically. Even fence posts being taken out and buildings being burned for fuel. Could it happen again? Of course it could happen. It happened. In other words, it has happened in our history. It has happened, but you don't know your history, and that's why I'm bringing this to you. So go look up the Civil War food riots or bread riots of 1863 to get an idea of what I'm talking about. If you don't believe me, go look it up online. So your gathering, hunting, fishing thing, even if you're way out in the boonies, you're going to have so many hordes of refugees heading out to the boonies looking for food because they have to get farther and farther away from the cities. So how successful do you think you're going to be with the hunting, gathering, fishing paradigm? Probably not very. I'm sorry to say. It's a good thought, and it may do you some good, but you probably ought to rethink it. I'm just telling you what I believe. Okay, but the next item on the list, and the most logical for most of you to start out with, is very simple to do, is your grocery store. Grocery store items are where most of us are going to start out with, and probably where most of us are going to end up with, actually. That's where most of us that's most of the people's food prepping method right there. Things you buy in the grocery store. The ideal way to do this is to buy things you would normally buy anyway, and so you don't waste it, you're still using it. Continue to use what you would normally eat and rotate it. Example, canned corn goes on sale, or something else, green beans or peas, whatever. Let's take an example of a vegetable. Be very simple. You can all relate to this. A can of corn, of beans, of peas, whatever. It goes on sale sometime, and 39 cents a can, or whatever. Some kind of really good price. You run and you buy a whole case of it. You're going to eat it anyway, but it's on sale. Buy a whole case. Take it back home. Put it in your pantry. Put it in your basement. Put it somewhere where it's not going to be rusty. Essentially, the only thing you have to worry about for the most part is cans, is rust. You don't have to worry about rodents in this case. Or freezing. You have to worry about freezing. But anyway, just a basement inside your home somewhere, that's fine. So buy a whole case. Put it down in your basement. Then you run out of corn. We got cans in the basement. Let's go get a can in the basement and bring it back up. Rotate it. Use what you have in your cupboard, because most of us will have about a week or two worth of food in our cupboard that we could get by with. You might start ending up with a half a bag of flour and some peanut butter and a half a thing of crackers or something. It might not be a whole lot of edible stuff there anymore that you can actually make into a meal, but most of us can probably scrounge for a week or two of what we have in our cabinets already. But if you have a bigger pantry, imagine how long it can last. So the next week, something else goes on sale, you buy another case. You build it up slowly where you have a large supply of food that can get you through many months possibly, depending on the size of your family and how long you think something's going to happen. So just have a bigger pantry. And that's simple to do. You have to be careful about buying too much of something that you can't use in a reasonable amount of time, some types of pastas or some other packaged goods that might not last very long, or you might have a rodent problem you have to worry about. These are all things you have to consider, but it's a relatively inexpensive way to get your food prepped. It's got a wide range of costs, a wide range of nutrition, because frankly, a lot of stuff we buy in the store isn't very nutritious anymore. And a wide range of conveniences. Some things you can buy, maybe just add water. Maybe you can eat it right out of the package. And so it's a mixed bag, but it can fit everybody's bill to some point or another. Unless you grow your own food, this is the way that most of us are going to have to do something. And this is something you can do fairly painlessly, little at a time, to get prepared for something that could happen. And what's the downside? The downside is, well, if you get too much, you might not eat it before it starts rotting. But if you buy what you eat anyway, that should not be an issue. The other downside might be rodents or insects, and you will have to do some measures against that, and you'll have to do some research about how to protect your food from those parasites. So, continue to use and what you would normally use on a regular basis and rotate it. That's an ideal way to go. So for everybody to start out with, and then you can expand into some of these other techniques we're going to be talking about, or ones we already have, at a later time when you have a little more time on your hands or ability to do it. A next method I'm going to talk about is actually something I used to do a lot: bulk grains. By bulk grains, I mean you can go to a feed store and you can buy bulk bags, sacks of wheat, beans, corn, rice, soybeans, all kinds of different commodities you can buy in large quantities in sacks, 50-pound sacks, 25-pound sacks. Typically, it's between 25 and 50-pound sacks of these grains you can buy. Now, you have to worry, there's some downside to this. Now, it is very inexpensive. Compared to the grocery store, it's going to be a lot less expensive than what you buy at a grocery store. Very easy to do. Just go and buy a large sack of something, take it home. Can have a very long shelf life if you store it properly. Can be easy to store in large quantities, because some things aren't easy to store in large quantities, but the bulk grains can be very easy to store in large quantities. Here's a method that I used to do that it works very well. You can buy these, plastic buckets with Gamma Seal lids on them. You pay all that extra money for that, but you don't have to go to that kind of expense. And you can pour your grains in there, and then you can put an oxygen absorber package in there, and that's one way. Here's a method that's even cheaper and probably even better that I used to do. Take your 5-gallon water bottles, those blue plastic things, 5 gallons that you turn upside down on a water cooler. The 5-gallon water, you find them anywhere. They're cheap or free, depending on where your source is. Take a nitrogen tank, like a welder's tank, with a regulator and a little hose coming out of the regulator. Put that hose down into the bottom of your 5-gallon water jug. Turn on your nitrogen. Don't turn on your nitrogen. Pour in your grains first. Pour in your grains. Corn, beans, rice, wheat, whatever. Pour in your grains. Get it filled up. Then pour in your nitrogen. Pour in your nitrogen. Turn on the nitrogen regulator. Turn on the nitrogen. Let the nitrogen start purging out the air. That's what you're doing here. So the nitrogen being heavier in air is going to start filling up the bottom of that tank, and it's going to fill it up until it's driving all the oxygen out of the tank, out of that water bottle. And when it gets to the top, then it's the oxygen is no longer, there's no oxygen in the bottle anymore. Then, and here's how you can tell: take a match and light it, and keep sticking the match in the neck of that bottle. And when the match suddenly goes out, then it's full of nitrogen. It no longer has any oxygen in it. Then you drop in an oxygen absorber or two for good measure. Then put a cap on it, or tape it, or seal it somehow, in addition to the cap, and it's going to last a long time. Why do we pack it in nitrogen? The reason being mainly is because of eggs. All your bulk grains are going to possibly have some eggs in it that you don't see. They don't put them in there on purpose. They're just there. It's just part of nature. And you have to be able to make sure that when those egg hatches, that they don't do any damage. The insects that come out of those eggs don't do any damage. So if they do hatch in a nitrogen environment, they will just die, and that's the end of it. There's no more. There's no more damage done. So basically, because this is just a fact of life, folks, you're going to have some eggs in your bulk grains. So you have to do something. Otherwise, you just put them in a bucket and put a Gamma Seal lid on it. You could wake up one day and go in your food storage and you open it up and it's just thousands of insects fly out of it, or it's just full of mold and everything because it's just all been consumed. So that's the downside. So if you just do a little bit of research on that, get your bulk grains for very low cost. Another downside is it actually takes a lot of energy to make these into a meal. In other words, okay, now you have a handful of wheat. What do you do with it? You can't really just eat the wheat. You could grind it into flour. You can do a lot of things with it, but it's going to take a lot of energy to either cook it or like kidney beans. You're not just going to eat a kidney bean. You're going to have to soak it. You're going to have to cook it. You're going to have to do something else to that grain in order to really make it edible for most grains. So it does take some work and maybe some energy. Will you have energy? Will you have an ability to make a fire to boil water or to cook something? You may or may not, depending on how you're preparing. So it takes some energy not only to make it into something that's edible, but it also is going to be very lacking in excitement. Okay, now you have a handful of wheat and you've cooked them. Okay, now what? You can eat them, yeah, or a handful of beans, or a handful of rice. Well, now if you mix the beans and rice together, that's a different story. But the beans and rice together still will be kind of boring unless you have some kind of spices. So another very good thing to have is some type of spices, some kind of flavoring, something to make it more interesting. Otherwise, you're going to be getting sick of what you have. If you buy hundreds and hundreds of pounds of wheat and hundreds of pounds of beans and rice, and eventually you're going to start getting sick of it unless you have a variety. So it's good to have a variety. Or have some type of spices or some kind of thing to be able to add to it. A little bit of meat you maybe have caught, that'd be great. Something else to add to it to make it a little more palatable over the long period of time. If you're only trying to survive a week or two, it's not an issue. But if you're trying to survive a long time, if you believe, like I do, that an electromagnetic pulse can take the grid down for more than a year, well then you're going to need to have a little bit more variety and something interesting, especially if you have children. So the bulk grains are a very good way to go, a very good way to supplement for long term. But again, here you really should be rotating. Yes, you can store it for a long, long time. I guess from what I understand, unless it's an urban legend, they found edible wheat in the pyramids, I believe is what they said. That's being stored there for thousands of years. So the bulk grains store a very, very long time. And if you protect them from the insects, then they're going to store virtually forever. Okay, next category, freeze-dried food. Now, freeze-dried, and again, full disclosure here, I sell freeze-dried food. We're not going to talk about it much, though. First of all, it's probably the most expensive method of food storage, but it is also probably the most convenient. The most convenient because really all you have to do is add boiling water. And frankly, you don't even need boiling water. You can do it with cold water. It's not as fun, it's not as interesting, not as good if it's cold, but if you have drinkable water, potable water, then you can just add water and you can have yourself literally more like a meal. Instead of a handful of wheat berries, you could have beef stew in just 10 minutes. So it's extremely convenient. It's very expensive though, and it is very nutritious compared to a lot of the other food storage methods. Freeze-dried food locks in a lot of the nutrients better than a lot of other food storage methods, and better than canning. And so it really is a good method for some food stores. And again here, even though you may have 25, 30-year shelf life on something that's freeze-dried, depending how it's packaged, something in the can is going to last a lot longer than something in a pouch or a bucket. That's because the can is less permeable to the oxygen and moisture than is a pouch or a plastic bucket. So something in a can is probably going to be better for you, although the cans don't have pouches in them, so you have a lot of food generally. When you open up the can, you do need to use it up within a certain period of time. If it's beef stew, for instance, if it's really beef stew, if it has real beef in it, that's got real meat in it, and you really have to treat it like leftovers. As soon as you open up that can, you really need to think about using it up because it really is meat in there, it really is food, and so the oxygen and moisture will start deteriorating that food. So really treat it like leftovers and start using it when you open up a can. That's not a big deal. Those cans will hold about 10 to 12 servings. And by serving, I mean 1 cup, 1 8-ounce cup. Most adults can eat almost 2 servings probably. But so that's even one person can eat that well within a week, that whole can. So it's not that big of a deal, the cans, of eating what's in the can, even though there's no pouches in it. If the bucket has pouches in it, you can just take out one pouch and use the one pouch, and you don't have to worry about the other pouches so much. But there is, again, the pouch is more permeable to oxygen and moisture. Once the oxygen and or moisture starts hitting it, the food is going to start deteriorating much quicker. So freeze-dried food, the most expensive, but the most convenient as well. So you're paying for that convenience. But it's a good in a pinch. I actually recommend you have every single one of these methods to some degree. Grow a little bit of your own. Learn how to hunt and trap or find native foods, grasses, leaves, and such. Native plants. Have some things from the grocery store. Have some bulk grains. Have some freeze-dried. All these things should be used in conjunction. A little bit of each because you don't know what's going to happen. One method might not. You don't have a way to cook. Then all those bulk grains are going to be really hard to deal with. You don't have a way to cook. How about the MREs? MREs are kind of in the category of freeze-dried food. MREs are also very expensive, but they also have a long storage life. Now, they aren't as long-term storage as, say, the freeze-dried food, because really an MRE, when the military has them, after 3 years, they have an inspection date. That doesn't mean they expire in 3 years. What that means, the military actually takes and decides what they're going to do with them, essentially. They're inspecting them. And even the MREs that you get, that I get them brand new from the factory. I get them already when they're 6 months old because they put them in quarantine for 6 months before they even release them. Do some testing or whatever until they release them. So MREs are going to be a little bit older, more than likely. If you find MREs, they're probably already going to be 2 or 3 years old already. And likely they're going to be 3 years or more because that's the inspection date when they either surplus them out or they do something with them. There's other ways of getting MREs. But MREs, and again, full disclosure here, I also sell MREs. They won't last as long. They'll last longer than 3 years, and frankly, I'm eating some right now that are 19 years old, and they seem okay. The ham slices, which don't exist anymore, at least the military doesn't make them anymore. The ham slices, a little bit of a rubbery skin on the outside when you eat them. Things like peanut butter and things with high oils, they'll be already gone, they'll be done. But in other words, there will be some things in an MRE that'll still be edible after 10 years or 20 years. But there will be some things that aren't. There's a lot of different things. If you don't know what MRE is, by the way, meal ready to eat. I should have said that from the beginning. Meal ready to eat. This is what the military gives our troops when they don't have a way really to get them in a typical mess tent or something else when you're in the field. Typically, that's what they use MREs for. Or they drop them on foreign countries with disasters and so on. But it's very expensive. It has a long, but not as long shelf life as the freeze-dried food. Think of the MREs as canned foods. Most canned foods you probably can have around for almost 10 years. Depending on what's in the can, you can still find it pretty edible after 10 years. It depends what it is. Certain cans, like things like a fruit cocktail or some kind of high acidic things, those won't last that long. They'll eat through the can, and eventually you'll have a lot of leakage and cans messes everywhere. But think of the pouch inside the MRE. Think of it as a can. It's a pouch instead of a can. And the pouch is aluminized, it's a plastic, it's okay, but just think about in terms of a shelf life like a can. So generally I recommend people who are trying to rely on MREs, again, you're going to need to rotate them, either that or after 10 years or whatever, you're going to end up throwing them away or whatever. Take them camping once in a while. Keep replenishing them. But try to use them up within about 10 years. That'd be my best recommendation. About 10 years is about the most. You really want to try to go with an MRE and have a successful, positive food storage method. They're very portable. They're very convenient. In fact, they're more convenient than freeze-dried food in a way because you don't even have to cook them or add water or anything. You just eat them right out of the package. MREs are designed for that. You just eat them right out of the package. Don't have to cook them at all. They're not very fun to eat if they're not cooked. If anybody's had an MRE, you know what I'm talking about. And also think of it as, pick on McDonald's here, but fast food. Think of it as fast food, junk food. Not very healthy, not very nutritious. High in sodium, high in fat, high in calories. They're designed to keep a soldier going in a stressful period, so how we say. So keep that in mind. They aren't probably the best thing for long-term food storage, unless you're going to continue to use them. But in a pinch, you have to grab a couple things and leave. They're there. You don't have to cook them or anything. You just eat them on the go. So MREs have their place. So a quick review. Best method, probably growing your own. Hunting, gathering, fishing, probably not reliable in a true emergency. The grocery store choices are going to be your best, easily done for anybody. Bulk grains, great for storing large quantities. Freeze-dried food, expensive but convenient. MREs, also expensive but convenient. But there's one other category I want to cover here. Now, we don't really like to talk about this, but we're going to have to. The last category of food storage, and I hear it on occasion. Luckily, I don't hear it too much. People, I guess a lot of people aren't willing to admit to this method of food storage, which is no storage at all, essentially. Their method of gaining their food in times of hardship will be predatory. These will be the people who become the most dangerous people out there. The predators that are coming for your food because you planned and they didn't. Now, I've had people come to my table and say, oh, I don't need any stuff, I got a gun. And I got neighbors who are crazy and they are prepared for stuff, well, I'm just going to go take what they have. This is obviously the most immoral and most dangerous method of food storage, but I'm just bringing it to your attention because some people, this is their method. It's not fun to think about because it's not really an acceptable form of food prepping, but some people admit that this is their method of obtaining food. They will become the walking dead. Now, these people might be a little smarter than the average walking dead, the average zombie, but let's hope they get weeded out pretty quickly by those of us who have prepared to put a stop to their shenanigans. But I bring it to your attention because it's something you have to think about. If you're highly dead set against guns, you've got to find a way to protect either that or here's the best method of all with your food storage, be invisible. In not only your food storage, but your food usage, your cooking, be invisible. If it appears you have nothing, just like everybody else, you may not become a target. If you paraded around the fact that years before the disaster that, oh, I'm prepared for anything, they're coming after you, these predators. So be invisible. Don't let anybody know what you're doing other than your closest family. And even that isn't a guarantee sometimes. But be invisible. Highly important in what you're doing, be invisible. Don't create a paper trail. Buying freeze-dried food over the internet is really not a very good idea, in my opinion. Why? Because there's said to be executive orders on the books that would say that in a time of national emergency, if you have more than 2 weeks with a food store, you might be considered a food hoarder, and you might get a knock on your door someday by some men in uniform who say, hey, bud, you got food and your neighbors don't, you need to share. And this gun says you're going to share. Let's have it. So, be invisible. Cash and carry, best way for long-term food storage, in my opinion. Same with it. Are you going to go order a bunch of ammunition online? Most of you won't do that. You'll want to buy them in person with cash. Think of food the same way. Food will be a commodity that will easily be traded, highly sought after, better than gold and silver, in my opinion. But even more important than the food, of course, you need to have a way of making clean water. And if you're relying on a ceramic filter for that, either the Berkey, the ProPur, the Aquarain, or something of that nature, Life Straw, dangerous. You will have a serious problem on your hands. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's some other videos here on YouTube. You can check that out. Do not ever rely on a ceramic filter for emergency purposes because you cannot filter out a virus. I don't care what any company says, you cannot filter out a virus. The CDC website is very clear about that. So anyway, be careful because water you're going to need before food. And you're going to need a way to make clean water. Otherwise, you're going to succumb before you even really need all the food. Because you can only go a couple days without the water, 3 or 4 days probably, before you're really going to start suffering. Food, you can go weeks, but water you're going to need quickly. So, try to prepare with cash, buying things. Water is more important than the food, but we've covered the sorting through the food storage choices here. Let's see, what else did I have to cover here? There's going to be a lot of people that die of waterborne illnesses. That's going to be how most people die. In fact, about 90% of us will be dead within a year of the grid going down. And it's not because of lack of food. More than likely, it's going to be some disease took you over because you didn't have any sanitation. It's another thing you got to think about. You didn't have any clean water to drink. That's the main thing. Then removing your wastes, your sewers are not working either. no garbage pickup, no medicines, no refrigeration. You got to think about these things as the grid goes down, or I should say when the grid goes down. All these things will not be available to you anymore, and you will have to do something, because that's what's going to kill most people. It isn't being shot by the zombies or whatever. It's because of sanitation. That's how most people are going to die. And go back to that Civil War example I gave you. Things can still happen. Are we really immune from something happening in this country? We have been for all of our lifetimes, basically, yes, other than the occasional Mother Nature storms of some kind, of what Mother Nature can throw at us. But we won't be able to withstand. I don't care how prepared you think you are not ready for this grid to go down for a year. In the case of an EMP, because even your generators probably won't work, even if you could get fuel for them, because the windings will be shorted out. And besides, if you have a generator running, you can hear those for miles away in all the silence of nothing, no cars running or anything. And you're going to be gangbait. You're going to be a target. So you really think you're going to be rely on a generator when nobody else has electricity, nobody else has power? Again, be invisible. That's the best way. Okay, thanks for everybody watching on YouTube. I'm going to stop the recording here.